we will. Okay, so tutorial 2 is about managing a multi-step workflow. Before we even start here, we're looking at the tutorial in GitHub, and you can see there are a number of different resources in here. Images is just the images that are used inside the README file here. So that's just useful images that help us document it. There is a code directory, and the code directory has 3 Python scripts in it. And each of those Python scripts manages one part of our multi-step workflow. We also have 2 suite directories. So they look similar in terms of the files that are in them. And the example suite is a very, very basic rows suite, as they're known. And this gets picked up by Rows and Silk when you run a specific suite, and these different files tell it what to do, tell it which tasks it needs to run, where it needs to run them, and with what resources should be applied to them, etc. When I talk through this, I'll mention that the instructions tell you to take a copy of example suite and then to write some code and generate a version of workshop suite. But when I run it, I'm going to jump straight into workshop suite and just use this exactly as is. So if you want to recreate this, a quick way to get there is to directly use what's in workshop suite. And you can directly use the code that's in the code directory rather than writing anything yourself. Okay, so I'll come back and refer to those things. So our scenario is that we want to analyze a set of historical temperature records from weather stations in the UK. And I'm interested in calculating annual maximum temperatures for a randomly selected set of 10 counties. So this is data that's already organized on the file system by county. And so I can go through and find 10 counties at random and then grab the data for those. This particular data set is in the publicly available Midas Open data from the Met Office, Midas archive, Midas database. And it's publicly available for anyone to do whatever they like with it. And one of the key reasons why we want to use Rows and Silk is that we've defined this as a multiple step workflow. So we know that we could do this on Lotus and we could manage it with some scripts ourselves. But one of the really nice things about Rows and Silk is that if you have a load of different tasks and there are dependencies between them, and some of them might be parallelized, some of them might be individual, you can build a workflow graph of what you want the entire workflow to be, and then you can get these tools to manage it for you. So I'm going to read some data in from these CSV files for multiple years. So here's an example. This is data for Devon from a particular station, and it will read in these time series of data and then merge them all together, and eventually we will get a nice graph of 10 or so time series of 10 or so years between 2000 up to about 2018, and we've calculated the annual maximum temperature from a number of different stations within each of those counties. So we want to read lots and lots of CSV files, and then we want to sort of aggregate all of this through to generate a single plot. So if we think about the workflow here, this follows what we'd call the sort of classic diamond structure, where your starting point is some kind of initialization. You then need to go off and perform many individual tasks in parallel. And then at the end, you've got some kind of finalization task. So the key point here is that we need to do some individual start thing, then we do multiple things in the middle, and then we gather all the results together and do a final thing. So one of the nice things is that the second part can be done in parallel. So we know Lotus is the right place to do that. And we know that Rose and Silk can pull all these things together. So if we start thinking about what the actual work is that we're going to do in this example, the initialization task is we want to clone the JASMIN workshop repository to somewhere on the local file system to pull out the extraction scripts. So these are the scripts that are in the code directory within this tutorial. And we want to run the first script that will look at the file system, and it will randomly give us a list of UK counties and write those to a text file. The second stage, for each of those counties found in a text file, it will calculate a time series of annual maximum temperature across all stations between 2000 and 2017. And then once all of those jobs have run, the finalization stage will be to read in each of those CSV files and then plot them all on a line graph to a single PNG file that will look just like this example here. And we can think about how we might sort of sketch out this kind of multi-step workflow in a diagram. So you might scribble this down on a piece of paper. That first thing you want to do is get the code from GitHub, copy it to the working directory. You want to run this script once. You want to run this script. It used to be 20 times. It's now only 10 times. And then you want to run the final script, plot county temps. So maybe we'll just have a quick look at the code itself, just to get a quick feel of it. So the first thing we want to do is create the counties file. And if we ignore all the documentation, this goes and looks inside this directory here. And the subdirectories are all names of counties. And it just lists the directory. It gets the first 10 counties in the subdirectory, randomly shuffles them and just gets the first 10. And then it writes these to an output file. The output file is going to be called just counties.txt. And that's the work of this first script. So it's a very simple thing. It's just going to make a decision about which counties we're going to run on. The second one, this uses the pandas library, which is really good for working with CSV and tabular data. And this will read in for each county. This takes an index value in. So it takes an index value, which will be from 1 to 10. And that's provided for us by the Rose Silk suite. It will then pick a county, and once it's picked a county, it will read in all the files that it's found. So I think this thing will open. So I'll keep it simple. So yeah, it finds a number of files, as done down here. It reads in the values into a pandas data frame for each of the files, and then down here it merges all of those together, having calculated the maximum for them, and we end up creating a new data frame and writing a CSV file of the time series of the maximum per county. So there's quite a lot going on there, but you can go and look at that in your own time and understand what it's doing. And then the final stage in this is that we read in each of the county files. So we find 10 of those on the file system. We read each of them in to separate pandas data frames. We concatenate all of those together into a single data frame. And then we generate some metadata to put into the plot. And then we're using matplotlib here to generate a plot, annotate it, and then finally write it out to a file. Here we're saving it to a PNG file, and our work is done. So as I said, that's quite a lot to grasp in a short term, but you can look at it in your own time. And the overview of what's happening here is all presented here. Okay, so one of the key things is we're breaking down a multi-step workflow, and we are managing it through rows and silk, telling it to manage all the dependencies within that workflow. In terms of the JASMIN resources we need to access the login servers first, and we need to get on the silk server, which is where we have to run our rows suites from. We are actually running all the jobs themselves on Lotus, so it's exactly the same in terms of you're using the batch cluster you've been using before. We happen to be using the workshop group workspace, but you could do this from your home directory as well. I think in my example, I'm using the home directory, but you could also run it from the group workspace. And we've got read access to the Cedar archive. And so before we get into the details of the task, we are going to log into the silk server. And it's really important that we include the -X flag when we log in, because we're going to have a graphical user interface showing us what's happening. In order for that to appear, we need -X to be included. And we're going to put together a suite file, which defines the rules of the suite and the resources attached to the suite, tells it what will run in what order, and how it's constructed. And then we're going to run it, and we can watch it run interactively. And then I'll talk about a few other aspects of rows and silk. So in terms of the walkthrough itself, what do I need to do? I need to log into the silk server. So anyone with JASMIN login access will automatically have access to the JASMIN silk server. And because I'm inside JASMIN here, typing silk here is the same as silk.jasmin.ac.uk. You'll notice when I'm actually on the host itself, it's called silk1. So silk is just an alias to silk1. They are exactly the same server. So the next parts of this talk about setting up these files. I'm lucky because they've already been written for me, so I'm not going to worry too much about these things. I've told you what each of these files does. To create counties, we'll just generate a set of counties and write it to this file. The extract annual max series.py will run 10 times, and it will create a CSV file for each county. And then the plot county temps will generate a PNG file, bring it all together in that final visualization, that final graphic. So these scripts are also on the group workspace if you want to look at them now, and they're on the GitHub repo that we're looking at the moment. Now, if you were to go through all this yourself, you'd probably look at the example suite to get an idea of how these things work. But I'm going to just take a quick look at the suite.rc file itself for the workshop suite. So this is the entire row suite. One of the things I like about this is you can just about fit it on one page. There we go. We could just about fit it on one page, but I'm going to make it a bit bigger so we can look at each part. But the key things to note are that this is just the sort of header stuff. You don't need to define parameters. but I want to define one parameter which is used by the suite further down. So I want to define a series of index numbers from 1 to 10, so that when I'm parallelizing my second stage, so when I want to run the script 10 times, and I want to use 10 different counties, so one as input each time, I set this up as just an index number, and each individual job will be sent a different input from this. This next thing is the workflow graph. So this says the order of things that need to happen. So the first thing is that we will clone the repository, and down here we have the clone repo step. Then we will get the counties. Down here we have get counties. We'll process each county, and then we'll plot. And we can see here, each of those steps is here. Process county, this has this less than greater than delimiter here. That's because this is picking up this silk parameter, and each time it gets run, it will insert a different number in, so that the first time this runs, it will run and process number 1, and so it will send this variable in as an input to the script and say, run this for number 1. So it will run on 10 different Lotus jobs, and each one of them will get a different input index, which we've set up here. So these are a few other things that we need to set up. This part we can ignore, we can just use that every time. The job and directives are important. We want to use slurm, and we're saying that the time limit, execution time limit for each step is 10 minutes. So this stands for process time 10 minutes. And then we've got our specific directives to send through to Slurm. So these are the things that we were using with SBatch in some of the other, when we're running some of the other exercises. So these get sent through directly to Slurm. Obviously, if you were running with your normal JASMIN account, you might have them set to short serial or something like that. And in which case you might not need the -- account option. And then finally, we have each of our steps. So this is the actual code. This is like a bash script that will get executed for each of the steps. So if we just see this one line at a time, the first thing that happens here is we remove any old directory called workshop repo. We then clone the JASMIN workshop repository. We clone it to this workshop repo directory. We then copy the scripts. So these are the Python scripts in the code directory of the tutorial. And we're copying these to this Silk Suite rundir. Now, this is the kind of running directory that gets created automatically by Rose and Silk when it runs. And in every step here, we're using it. So initially, we just copy the content to it in our first step, and then we delete this stuff. After that, things start looking very similar. Module load JASP says we want to use the JASP stuff at each step. We want to then change directory to this place where we copied the code, and also where the outputs will be written in a subdirectory called outputs. And then we want to run create counties file. Then we want to run extract annual max series with each of the different indices for each county. And then in the plot step, we just want to run plot county temps. And in every case, we load JASP so that we've got access to the right Python and the right packages. And then we change directory to this standard running directory that's used throughout the Silk suite. Now, again, there's a lot there. Luckily, we don't have to remember all that. We can just copy and paste most of it and watch it in action. Okay, so if we come back to our instructions, actually getting started here, if we want to run the suite, there are just 2 lines involved. So if I look here, I've got JASMIN Workshop already cloned locally. I can go into tutorials, tutorial 02, and then here we have workshop suite. So I go into workshop suite, and now in order, if I type rows now, the system doesn't know about rows because rows is installed under this specific directory. So before I run rows or silk commands, I have to just update my path so that it knows where to find rows. And now I can do rows suite run, and this is going to look in this local directory. So we've got here this suite.rc file, and we've got these other files which are in each of the suites. So the suite.rc file was the one we were just looking at. And now I can just do rows suite run, and it will go and look for those files and get things running. I just want to recap that I did capital -X. And that means that when it tries to open the graphical user interface, that will appear on my system. Okay, so here we are able to look at this really nice, simple interface. So this is listing my entire process. Clone repo is the first thing it wants to run, and it says this job's been submitted. You can see over here it says submitted. So it's light green, which means it's running, it's submitted. All of these just are showing as a blue box, which are basically saying that they're waiting, they haven't been submitted yet. Now, I said that these things are all running on Lotus, so let's have a look down here. You can see here, maybe if I put it at the top, I can run SQ, and this tells me that at the moment, clone repo is running. At the moment, it's running for a surprisingly long amount of time, which might mean that other things are happening that are causing interactions. It only took a few seconds earlier on. But we can observe that in action whilst also observing over here what is going on. We can also view this in a different view here. So if you click the drop-down menu beside where it says View 1, you can select a graph view, and the graph view shows you your workflow laid out as a set of separate bubbles that are joined up. So it shows the dependencies between them. So clone repo will run, and then when it's done that, it will run get counties and then gradually work its way through. I'll go back to the standard running view. Now, what do they always say about doing a live demo? At the moment, I'm interested in why it's taking so long to do this, because typically, in a normal situation, this would run in sort of 5 to 10 seconds. I might just have a little, I'll be patient with it. I'll just go and have a look inside my Silk run directory. So Silk automatically sets up a Silk run directory in your home directory. And for each suite, it puts things in there. So it's certainly running, it's certainly doing things. And so it's copied those things locally. So it's copied this suite RC file locally. That's the same one, that's all good. And I can even have a look at the logs here. In fact, I can have a look at the logs here inside the GUI. So I can say, well, do we have a job log? Is anything happening? Okay, nothing in that one. There's lots of different logs get created, both by the job itself and by the and by Slurm. Okay, so it hasn't written anything there yet. Okay, I'm going to make an executive decision to see if I can I'm going to reset the status of that. See if I can set that to waiting, and see if it will kick it off again. Let's just try one more time. What do they say about live demos, eh? Okay, so it has kicked that off multiple times now. I don't know how useful that will be. Just check if there's lots of things. There aren't that many things running in the workshop queue. So I think what I will attempt to do is I will kill this and try it again. And
Ag, how many tasks each get launched concurrently? Because there's a limit to 10.
Yeah,
on
so
the workshop view.
It's been working fine,
Okay.
Fatima. So earlier on, I ran it when you were doing your last demo,
Right.
Okay. And so it runs one, and then another, and then it runs 10 in parallel. Oh. But it's not even it's been happily running the first one, but not got any further. So what we'll do is we'll
you've got an audience, like that's why.
It does. I'm going to try and do clean up the suite. It's going to ask me to stop the suite first. I'm going to tell it to clean up, and I'm going to try and run it again. If in doubt. Oh yeah, sorry. Need to go back to where I was. We'll see what happens again. In the meantime, I'll talk about some other stuff. So I can talk you through what it should look like. So when it decides to run properly, it will give you a list of tasks, and it will run through them. So it will grey them out when they're completed, and they'll go dark green when they're running. So you can see some have succeeded over here, some have started, and it will work its way through. Try and do these things in parallel. Okay, so yeah, it's having some interesting issues. So I'm going to leave it be and just talk through things. So yeah, earlier on when it ran, you get this kind of output. It breaks things down. I talked about how you can change the view so you can get a nice graph view. And when jobs actually fail, so in our case, it just was taking a very long time to run, and we're not sure why. When jobs fail, they go red. And when that's the case, you can then use the GUI interface to have a look at them, to look at the error files, look at the output files, etc. So you can right click and then go through, and it will open up a little editor window and allow you to see what's gone on in certain tasks, etc., etc. Given that we've been slightly delayed by that, I won't spend too long on the rest of the stuff, but just to say, so when it works properly for you, it's one of the really useful things about Rose and Silk is that it does all the dependency management for you. So you build a little workflow graph in that suite RC file, and then it only bothers to complete the tasks if those that they're dependent on have run successfully. So there is a slight overhead in learning how to use it and learning how to configure it, but otherwise you end up building a load of tools yourself, and you quite often build a lot of things to check that things ran properly. Whereas in this case, you're handing over all of that information to a tool that's set up to manage those kind of things. And you can manage all kinds of complex rules about how to respond to failures. So in some cases, you can allow certain failures, you can retry certain tasks, certain amount of times, all those kind of things. One thing you might want to do if you're using Rose and Silk quite a lot is that you might want to add add the export of setting the path into your .bash rc file or your .bash_profile file. That just means that it will automatically run this bit of code every time you log into Jasmine. And or equally, you can set it so that it will detect when your host name is silk1.jasmine.ac.uk, and it will add this to your path whenever you log into that server. So that can save you time. And one thing you might do when you're running big jobs is you might want to write your outputs to different places. So you might want to decide to write your outputs directly to group workspaces. At the moment, the Silk run directory symbolically links through to work scratch and the content of that, but you might want to change that yourself. And there's just a few other things here, such as cleaning up, tidying up the logs and the content of an existing suite if you want to rerun it. So you can run Rose Silk clean. And also, if you just want to view the graph itself, you can do Rose suite run -i, and it won't run anything. It won't submit any jobs. It will just read the graph in, understand it, and generate this nice visualization for you. Now, I think in the interest of time, unless this suddenly runs, I should probably hand back and we can start to conclude. We'll give it a moment. It will appear and it will either look good or it will just be waiting a long time again. Sorry, wrong person. I am two people on Jasmine. So yeah, I think I'm going to abandon. So, oh no, there you go. It's completed. It's changed color. Oh no, sorry, it's only started. Maybe that's where we were last time. Oh, but something has happened this time. Okay, so now it's completed the first task. It's run get counties now, and you can see the others are firing up. So the others are now pending in the queue. Over here, you can see that they've gone green. The first two have gone grey. And so these are all running on different nodes. These could be running on any of the nodes available to the workshop queue. And so they've now all started. We can see some of them are running, some of them are completing with their status here. And once they've all run, then it will run the last one and generate the plot. And by then, so here I am in the output directory of the job, and we can now see that it's created counties, it's created these CSV files, and we can have a look at the PNG file, and hopefully it is there. So as they say, never worked with children or animals or live demos, in a moment, I hope that the display command will show me a little image magic view. Okay, so there's our output based on that run. But I think it's time for me to hand back, and I hope that was useful.
Thanks, Ag. And I guess that's one of the reasons